about part of the third ingredient in the training scale right now. The third ingredient in the training scale is contact and connection. And in this session I just want to discuss contact, and in another session I want to talk about connection. But contact has to come before you can ask your horse to connect, in other words, to be on the bit. You need to be able to establish what I call a sympathetic or inviting contact with the horse's mouth before you can fairly ask him to connect, which means come from behind, over his back, through his neck, into your sympathetic contact, and then your hand can recycle all that power back to the hind legs. So we need to be sure that the contact that we offer the horse is very sympathetic and very inviting. The kind horse, like Moshi, if the contact is not inviting, they show their reluctance to step into the contact in any number of ways. They can poke their noses out and come above the bit. They can curl their chins into their chest and come behind the bit, or they can just slow down and go less forward in order to save themselves. So you want to be sure before you ask your horse to connect, part of that third ingredient in the training scale, that you have a good contact. So here are the qualities that make up a good contact. There are 5 things that you need to think about. Your contact, number 1, should be firm. Number 2, consistent. Number 3, elastic. Number 4, symmetrical. And number 5, you want to have a straight line from the bit through your hand to your elbow. And I'm going to explain each of those 5 things a little bit more in depth right now. The first thing is firmness. And with a horse in like a training or a first level balance, I like to have a good solid 1 or 2 pounds in my hands. I want to feel that when I pick up the rein, I feel the hind legs in my hands. Now that's a little bit confusing for some people because a lot of times they think light, light, light. I want my horse light in my hand. Excuse me. And there's a saying that says the horse must be correctly heavy, and I'm not talking about a dull, strong, downward, dead feeling pull, but the horse must be correctly heavy before you can then make him correctly light, which means to collect him. In other words, he has to be connected before you can collect him, the 6th ingredient in the training scale. So lightness at training and first level is not a good thing. It indicates that you don't have the hind legs in your hand, that you're not connecting the hind legs into your hand. Lightness, true lightness, comes from self-carriage, and we start that modest collection at 2nd level and then 3rd level and above. Then we have true lightness because the horse has shifted the center of gravity toward the hind legs. So you want to have a nice, firm contact. I like 1 or 2 pounds. Now the second thing, I'm going to take these first 2 things together, firmness, and the second thing, which is consistency. With this firm contact, you want to maintain a consistent contact with your horse's mouth. In other words, you don't want the rein to go straight and loopy, straight and loopy, straight and loopy, because truly the horse doesn't care if the rein is loopy, but every time you touch him in the mouth again, you're giving him a little jerk in the teeth, and that's not going to encourage your horse to go forward into your hand. Actually, I'm going to take the 3rd thing along with that. The 3rd thing was elasticity. Now, that sounds kind of like a dressage term, but all you need to think about is the word elastic refers to your elbows. E for elastic, E for your elbows. And your elbows must be elastic according to what gait you're in, because what your elastic elbows allow for is movement. So in the walk and in the canter, the horse uses his neck forward and back, forward and back, forward and back. So your elastic elbows have to move forward and back to allow the horse to use his neck. And you start with your elbow pretty much bent at your side. I call that home position. And then you can straighten your arm almost completely straight, but then be sure you come back to home position in the walk and in the canter, because once your arm is straight, if you keep it straight, a straight arm has no elasticity. It has no give. And so you want to be able to start in home position, you can straighten the arm, put your hands towards your horse's mouth, but then come back to home position. That's what you do in the walk and in the canter to allow for the movement of the horse's head and neck forward and back. Now in the trot, the horse doesn't move his neck. So in sitting trot, you just keep your elbows bent at your side and your hands are still. However, in rising trot, you move. There is movement. And once again, your elastic elbows have to allow for that movement. But it's a different kind of movement because rather than the horse's neck going forward and back, you're going up and down. Now look at this. If I were to freeze my elbows on my side and I didn't have an elastic elbow and I was in rising trot, watch my hands. As I go up, my hands go up. As I come down, my hands come down. So up, down, up, down. So your elastic elbows have to work in the rising trot as well, but in a different way. They open and close like a hinge on a door, so that you think that when you go up, you almost push your hands down. Down, look at my elbows, down. And that way your hands stay steady over the horse's withers. Now it's particularly important when you do transitions from gait to gait that you switch over from one form of elastic elbows to the other form of elastic elbows. In other words, if I'm going from the canter where I'm going row, row, row the boat into rising trot, I have to immediately switch over to using my elbows that way. Or if I'm going from walk to rising trot, I go from row, row, row your boat in the walk, and on that first step of trot, I open my elbows and push my hands down. Down. They're not really going down, they're just staying still. They're not coming up and down with me. If you don't stay elastic right around the transitions, your horse is going to hit your hand during the transition, come above the bit, come behind the bit, or be reluctant to go forward. Actually, I'm going to finish all the 5 ingredients of sympathetic contact before I actually demonstrate that to you. The next ingredient is that your hands are symmetrical, which means one hand is the mirror image of the other. And hands can be not symmetrical in a number of different ways. You can carry one hand higher than the other. You can carry one hand closer to your body than the other. And sometimes, when you do have correct contact, you should have your thumb as the highest point of the hand. Sometimes people collapse one hand. They have one thumb up and the other thumb down, and they sort of look like they're playing a piano. So you want to be sure that one hand is the mirror image of the other, so that you give to the horse the feeling of what I call one bearing on the rein, which means that as far as he's concerned, you feel like you have both reins in one hand. You can only have one bearing on the rein if you have both reins in one hand. And your goal when you're being symmetrical with your hands is to give the horse the feeling in his mouth that he would have when you have the reins in two hands, that you would have when you have the reins in one hand. And the 5th ingredient is that straight line from the bit through your hand to your elbow. Because once you pick up contact, your arm doesn't belong to you anymore. It's an extension of the rein. It belongs to the horse. So if you don't have that straight line from the bit through your hand to your elbow, because you carry your hands too high or you carry your hands too low, and there's an angle where the rein meets your hand, then the action of the rein stops right at your hand. And that means the action of the rein can't function in two ways. Number one, it's just like breaking a circuit or cutting a wire, an electrical wire. If your hands are too low or your hands are too high and the action of the rein stops at your hand, the action of the rein cannot travel through your arm down your back and affect the back of the horse. Also, the action of the rein cannot travel through the body of the horse and affect the hind leg on the same side. So it's very important that you have that straight line from the bit through your hand to your elbow. Now I'm going to demonstrate those 5 qualities of good contact. So first of all, I'm just going to walk on the buckle. Just going to walk with no contact. And I want to think, when I pick up the rein, I want to feel a good 1 to 2 pounds in my hand. And notice that the reins stay consistently in contact with my horse's mouth. I don't go loopy straight, loopy straight, loopy straight. I keep that straight line contact so that I feel his hind legs, that firm, consistent contact every stride of the walk. And you can see that Moshe uses his neck forward and back, forward and back. So I row, row, row the boat with my elastic elbow that starts in home position, goes forward toward his mouth, and then comes back to a bent elbow at my side. Then as I run through my little checklist, I think, are my hands symmetrical? Is one hand the mirror image of the other? In other words, are they equidistant from my body? Are they both the same height? And is one hand, both hands with the thumb as the highest point of the hand? My fifth ingredient is that straight line from bit through the hand to the elbow. Now, getting back to the symmetrical contact, like I said, a good exercise for you to do is to take both reins in one hand and imagine what that feels like to the horse in his mouth. You have one bearing on the rein. And you can only have one bearing on the rein because you have both reins in one hand. Then when you take up the contact in the two reins, try to imitate that feeling of the reins being in one hand. You know, a lot of times riders say, oh, my horse is stronger on the right side than he is on the left side. You need to be sure that you're offering the horse an even contact, as if you have both reins in one hand, so that you know it's not you doing this, pulling on one rein, and therefore the horse feels stronger in one hand than the other hand. So now I'm going to do a little rising trot, and you're going to see the difference in the way that I use my elbows from the walk as I do the transition into rising trot. Just focus on my elbows. So I push my hands down, 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 and then walk and row, row, row the boat. Now I'm going to go to the canter, where I also row, row, row the boat, and I'll do a transition from the canter into the rising trot, and you'll see in the moment of the transition how I switch from rowing the boat to opening the hinge on the door. Row, row, row the boat. Firm, consistent, elastic, one bearing on the rein, straight line bit, hand, elbow, and trot rising, open the elbows, open, when I sit, the hands are still, and when I walk, row, row, row the boat. So that's a little demonstration of contact, half of the third ingredient in the training scale. And in the next session, we'll talk about connection. You have to have this good contact before you can ask for connection.